Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History. Today, we're kind of going to wrap up this section about, or this discussion about opening the West. And in particular, we're going to talk about the effects that railroads have as they begin to make their way and connect more of the United States. And in particular, how they start to create more of a divide between companies, especially wealthy companies, and individuals like farmers and small business owners. And so that's kind of where we're going to pick up. And so with this expansion, we're going to be able to identify how the railroad system expansion, as it expanded rapidly in the late 1800s, how it was building large fortunes for some wealthy people. And then also we're going to see how later those practices tend to favor the more wealthy as opposed to those with less wealth. So we have large groups who labor, or they go and work for railroad companies, and they build nearly 200,000 miles of railroad track throughout the United States. And they often worked for these large railroad companies. And it was quite common to see these smaller companies consolidate. And so this is the practice of combining separate companies into typically one larger company. And typically today in the 21st century, you see this a lot with tech companies, is bigger ones buying up competition. And we're going to talk about in the future how that can pose a problem, especially with monopolies and other situations where competition's less present. And so you saw this with companies with larger railroads buying up smaller ones, and they did this because they thought it would bring more efficiency and uniformity. So the idea that things would be more the same, things could be done more quickly by one company as opposed to three smaller ones. And so you're going to see some individuals build a tremendous amount of wealth through this practice. And so you do see these few powerful individuals who become known as railroad barons, controlling a lot of the rail traffic. And probably the most famous example we have from U.S. history is Cornelius Vanderbilt. You might know him because later on he's going to have a university named after him. But he's going to make a tremendous amount of money in this process of buying up the railroads and consolidating smaller companies into his bigger company. He's really going to pave the way for a lot of these industrial giants along the way, whether it's your Rockefellers or your Carnegies, certainly your JP Morgan Chases. You're going to see he's going to help pave the way for a lot of them. But you're also going to see that with those changes, you're going to see some changes in industry and American life in general with these railroad changes, and you're going to see some of them benefit people, but others tend to benefit the companies, especially larger companies that provide the most money for the railroads. Just a quick check-in. You've got the 4 time zones that are created, but you can see from the map here, just again, by 1870, the Transcontinental Railroad has been finished, connected, San Francisco and Sacramento all the way to the East Coast. But you're going to see by 1870, large parts of the northern part of the United States have been, well connected through the railroads. You're starting to see the southern regions more connected there as well. And then by 1890, the track in black, you're starting to see even more of the country. And so a lot of these states are now going to be joining the United States, these territories becoming states, in order to provide, again, for connection to markets and connecting people. So railroads begin to have an impact outside of themselves because they're going to help to stimulate or help grow the steel industry, the lumber industry, as well as the coal industries. And because as railroads are created, all three of those are needed to build them. But at the same time, they're also going to promote the growth of those into cities and other expansion, especially as we add more states. And so we're going to see the creation of thousands of jobs. You're also going to see that in order to make things more efficient, You're going to see the adoption of what's called a standard gauge, or a width of railroad track. Essentially, this is a uniform width at about 4 feet, 8.5 inches for railroad tracks, and that's going to be adopted in the 1880s, which is going to make it the same. So train companies know exactly how big they need to make their wheels, and they can better understand and make it more efficient, because now it's going to be the same across the board as opposed to changing depending on the railway. So that's going to get adopted. Shipping's going to get faster, and as a result, prices are going to become cheaper. And so there are some benefits to some of this consolidation, but as you're going to see, there's also some downsides. With this growth of the railroads, you're also going to see some new technology that was put in place to improve the transportation via the railroads. Air brakes, for example, can help a train stop much more quickly. That would be invented by George Westinghouse. You might know the Westinghouse company now more for electronics, and also like cranes and other infrastructure items. The Janey car couplers for connecting car trains more efficiently. That would be Eli H. Janey. Refrigerated cars for moving beef and other foods. That's Gustavus Swift. And then you've got the Pullman sleeping car for people who are going on those longer trips on cars, and that's George M. Pullman. Here's where some of the economic policies begin to divide people who have and people who do not have, so between our rich and our poor. Railroad companies started to offer rebates, and these were offered to large railroad, or by large railroads to their biggest customers. It helped to decrease their costs, and it was a way of thanking them for using the railroads. Problem is, to offset the cost of that, it increased the freight rates for people who couldn't afford it, like farmers, small businesses, and other smaller customers. So it essentially takes the cost from a group that could afford it to now a group who couldn't. You're also going to see the beginnings of these different companies pooling together. And so with fewer companies and less competition, they started to create these pools, or these secret agreements among the different railroad barons, who all agreed together to increase costs so that none of them would have to, compete with the other one for a lower cost. So they all say, okay, it's going to go up 10 cents, per a trip, or, per a certain unit of mileage. And so you're going to see those higher rates result. And so you're going to see, because of that greed, it's going to affect your farmers. It's going to affect your smaller customers. And so you're going to start to see, again, that increase in the divide between the rich and the poor as a result of consolidation and the increased ownership by a few people as opposed to more competition. So that's going to wrap up kind of this discussion on opening the West. Our next unit is going to kind of bring together the changing economics and the changing industry in the United States as a result of some of this opening, and also some of these new technologies. So for my students, please make sure that you've been following along with the guide notes. Please ask any questions that you have. For those of you who are listening, just for the history, we appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening. Hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you again for listening.